Oh, yeah. So welcome everybody to this month's, so it's March's video, and today's special guest is going to be Marce here from Heybrownberry, and just a little story about how I first met, well, I don't know how I first met you, but I just remember, I think somehow I was in Tasmania and I started to find like people online, and I think we just got chatting on, and you were just so open and lovely, and that's always what I've always known, is that you're so generous with your information, and your podcast is so informative and welcoming and calming and wonderful, and we just became really, really good friends. You ended up staying with me in Ireland for woolen in a little cottage that I found you, and I was like, I've got to make this the most authentic, cute Irish thing ever, just for Marce, and it was the most wonderful thing ever.
We did an amazing job of that. A+ work.
It was so good. The Irish cuisine wasn't, it was pesto pasta.
We made it work. We made it work.
We did. It was beautiful. And yeah, so I just wanted to say how wonderful you are, and I'm really delighted I get the chance to ask you all the nitty-gritty questions.
Thank you, my dear. That's so sweet. I do also have a positive memory of our first interactions, bumping into each other in all the same spaces online. And I'm very glad that became an in real life friendship.
Defo. So I guess, so we're here to talk about spinning. So I just wanted to ask you, how did you know how to spin when I first met you, or how did you first start to spin?
I didn't. I started spinning. I would say that I knew of Handspun and the fact that people could make their own yarn for a long time, but I really didn't pick up an interest in it at the same time that I got into fiber crafts. I was a crocheter first, and then I knit for a really long time before I ever contemplated anything related to handspun and fiber. So I started as a drop spindle spinner. And
I remember this, yeah.
Even that, I feel like I just fell into it because an opportunity came up for me to attend a festival with one of my dearest friends, Maria. She lives a few states north of me, and we met through Instagram, became friends, and decided we would spend a weekend together attending this festival. And she had sent me the information about all of the possible workshops you could do. And it was a combination survival skills, fiber arts, kind of handmade crafts festival. So there was just
amazing.
A bounty of things you could learn in this 3-day time period. And I think what happened is when I saw the list, of course, make your own yarn jumped out at me. And I thought, okay, this is something that I could do. I had my daughters with me. I thought they might be interested in it. And Maria actually knew of the teacher and recommended the teacher as somebody who might be good with a beginner. So I signed up for that, and the whole weekend turned out to be amazing. But I think the reason I became a spinner on that day is the teacher was great, and learning to drop spindle spin over the course of a few hours went fairly well. If you look at my first yarn, you might not think so, but it went really well, enough that I wanted to keep practicing. And because I was staying with Maria, who was already a spinner and knew a lot about fiber, I could practice the whole rest of the 5 days that we were there. So I think because I learned from someone who's good with beginners, and then was able to just keep practicing with it for days after that, it really stuck with me. And it's now going on 4 years ago. So for the first couple of years, it was only drop spindle spinning. I didn't have a wheel or any desire at the time for a wheel. Those silly days. And I found it really meditative, and I found it to be a very calming thing to spin on the spindle. And I also found an excuse to build another type of stash. And that was awesome.
Always.
Yeah, learning about different types of fiber. And for me, with the drop spindle, I feel like you're very close to the fiber in that drafting and really trying to use mostly your body to turn it into yarn. So trying out different fibers and things in the beginning, it kept me happy with the drop spindle for a while. And I don't know if she planned this, but Maria is also the person who helped me get my first wheel a couple of years after that. I had said to her, yeah, I've seen videos now about spinning on the wheel and I'm happy with my drop spindle, but if an opportunity came up to get a wheel used, I wouldn't mind it. I had tried hers at her house and was very awkward with treadling and drafting, but I was open to it. And a few months after that, she went to SAF, which is a pretty well-known festival in the southeastern US. And part of those festivities included a marketplace where people could come and sell used fiber equipment and other things. And she calls me up that week and she's like, I just sat down and I spun on this woman's wheel and she's selling it and she's got fiber and all the accessories. Do you want it? And she's in North Carolina. I'm in Florida. But because it was her, I was like, yeah, I want it. Let's buy a wheel. So it was nice to have my own personal shopper.
Well, especially because she knows what was good, you know, and she knew what would suit you, and she knew it was a good wheel. I mean, you'll never find a better source.
Very lucky. She asked all the questions for me. She sat down and tried it and knew that it was functioning. It was a really sweet scenario. It gave me an excuse to go see her some months later because she fostered it for me for a little while. And then I was able to go and pick up Lulu, my Louette S10.
Lulu.
Back there.
How long have you had her now?
So that would have been, this is 2021 already. Good grief. 2019 summer. Not too long enough that.
Year and a half, 18 months, yeah.
I'm hooked.
If it was a baby, it'd be running around causing havoc, so yeah.
That's like me running into new types of yarn to try, yeah. It's been good. I actually still spin on the drop spindle a good bit. I find that really portable. I like to do it when I'm walking. So I haven't gone 100% over to the wheel for everything. I almost always have something on the drop spindle. And I taught spinning after a couple of years of learning. So I have a special place in my heart for it still.
There's something really, for me with the drop spindling, there's something that harkens back to historical fiber craft and, you know, that craftsmanship of the literally the person. That's how you know, it used to be done. All the shepherds used to go out and spin as they were minding their flocks. Women used to go around as they were minding their kids, go into market. It's something that connects you really closely to the history of it as well as the physicality of it, I think, which is.
I totally agree. Yeah, that's well said. I think that part of my attraction to fiber crafts in general is because I am really drawn to things as they were. I traditional crafts and any kind of craft that has been around longer than any of us is attractive to me. And that comes for anything. That comes with gardening and food and making clothes. I'm not great at all of those things, but I am attracted to the ancestral way. In fact, I have to be honest with my knitting and being in the knitting community, I've had periodic struggles with what is my historic and ancestral connection to knitting. I think that in my mind, I generalize some fiber crafts as like things that might be primarily European, Scandinavian, or, you know, even just more common for colder weather countries because it used to be so utilitarian that would make sense.
And so it's wool, like wool is specific to kind of, you know,
certain areas. Mm-hmm. So I've thought about that when it comes to my knitting, like how do I connect to this? Because it would feel good to have a connection with my own kind of lineage. And of course, there have been Caribbean, African, Black fiber artists forever. But I have to say that when I got into spinning, to me, that's what opened up the idea of the materials. And those materials go way back for all of us. Like that's historical for all of us, whether it was used in African tapestry weaving or, you know, thread making, any of those things that fiber can be used for in its various forms. You go back far enough and we all have that in common in our history. And so that kind of brought it a little bit closer for me.
Ah, that's lovely. I was demonstrating once in the middle of Limerick City. I had my wheel, you know, and this man came up to me and he was from Togo. And he said to me, my mother still does this, but not with that machine. She does it with he was trying to explain it and he didn't know the word. I was like, a spindle? Is it this? And I pulled it out and he's like, that's it. And I was like, she's still doing it. And she was like, yeah, she makes it, and she still does it in her village, you know. And there was something that just like this big burly man, I think he works in the hospital as security or something. And he came, and we would just have this really amazing link that you'd never think walking
Yes.
down the street that any two people like that would have that link. But, you know, it all starts with thread, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I'm all for the wonderful things you can make out of it, but there is something very sentimental for me to understand place and that connection too.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's
lovely.
really cool. I think you do well, Grace, to be out there and show these things, because interactions like that are just, I love stuff like that. I like the way that it brings up conversation.
Totally. And I've had loads of men come over to me and say that from all different countries. Like, I remember my grandmother doing that, like
Right.
in Pakistan, in Nepal. Like, there was a Chinese lady that came over and didn't have a word of Chinese, and she sat down on the wheel. She's like, can I have a go? And I was like, yes. She's like, oh, I remember my mom doing this, and she told me how to do it, or kind of like her daughter translated for me. It was amazing. Like, it was amazing.
I agree. I think that that's worth a lot.
Definitely.
Once you think of something as a hobby, it may not have value for everybody, but the connections like that, for me especially, that's part of how I feel comfortable in this community, is that I feel like I have the same sorts of appreciation for those kinds of things. And with spinning now too, I see how much more I can control when I do work towards, you know, a handmade item. That's pretty appealing too.
Is that so? My next question. So that was the first question. So yeah, like right now, like where you are in your spinning journey now, what do you find is like your most satisfying? What do you enjoy most about at the moment? The hard one, isn't it? You asked me this.
The parts that light me up, there's a couple things. So I love that I can dye yarn and fiber the colors that I want, and then see how that expresses in a yarn or in a project. So that's what I find the most satisfying, is adding color is big for me. But a very close second is plying, which might be a weird answer, but when I sit down to make singles in a yarn, I know that you can use singles in projects, but when I sit down to make singles, that's for me usually still an in progress process. It's not all the way there yet. I find plying to be the most rhythmic. By the time I'm plying a yarn, I'm not doing so much calculation of twist and counting treadles and other things. It comes a little bit more smoothly for me. And so I find it a very relaxing process. So in all the steps that go between fiber, fluff, and stuff, plying is my favorite.
Love, yeah. Yeah, there's something really satisfying.
Like you look at it, you're like, that's yarn. I can do something with this.
It has become.
Yeah, it's my favorite.
So is there anything then that you find like the most frustrating? Like what's the thing that you really don't like?
I'm frustrated with my own impatience for a craft that I've only been doing for less than 4 years. Because it makes me, it has me sometimes wanting to skip steps that I really shouldn't skip. And I'm going to call her out here. Rachel Smith is on here, and I'm part of her woolen spinning patrons. And I love the conversations we have there, because I constantly get reminded that although I might be impatient to have, you know, the quote unquote perfect 3-ply, or get really good at chain plying and have a fat 100-gram skein of completely consistent yarn, there are steps that help towards that. And so I get frustrated at myself when things don't work out. So something is really overspun and I can't use it well, or I haven't prepped a fiber in a way that really works for that fiber. And so then it's hard for me to spin. Most of the time, that's just because I'm anxious to get to the finish. And that's just part of my character.
That's the goal, because it's so fast.
And yeah, so it's frustrating, but it's also eye-opening for me, who I am as a spinner. Okay, Marce, your tendency is that you want to get to the end, and so you tend to skip things. What can we do with that? So it's frustrating because it's my instinct. But the act of spinning itself, there's not a lot of things that I find frustrating about the act of spinning once I'm in it. And what that impatience has led me to is, what are the small things that I can do, the steps that I can introduce that don't make it feel like I'm taking on this whole big thing to become a certain kind of spinner, because that would turn me off as well. And so I do little things like sampling. A year ago, sampling was not a thing for me.
I still don't sample.
I'm supposed to make a tiny amount of this yarn to learn about it before I get into the fun part of spinning it. I don't understand. Yeah, so yeah, I just try to introduce little things like that, and just trying to listen to what other people are doing and watching what they're doing, even if that doesn't fit my specific project. Be patient enough to just watch someone else's process, and that I almost always pick up a few nuggets from there.
You always learn whatever you're watching.
Yeah, I do enjoy that part.
Yeah, that is fab. So would that be, so I get this question a lot. I got this question today actually on Instagram 3 times. Do you have any advice for beginning spinners, for spinners who want to begin to learn how to spin?
Yeah.
Or any like, yeah, so I can see there's just a question from Sherry. I'm a total beginner and never thought of sampling. Great suggestion. So is there any other things that you might?
I would definitely suggest that, especially if you're just starting, because it's starting with what I think is a good habit. Advice for new spinners. So I've taught drop spindle spinning, and I've taught it to people who never touched a spindle or a bit of unprocessed fluff before. And one of the things I tell them right from the beginning is fiber plus twist equals yarn. If you start with the attitude that you're not trying to make a commercial yarn, you're not even trying to make what you would think of as a pretty yarn. You're trying to learn the process of adding twists to a bit of fiber, which has, different formats of organization. And you want to make enough twists so that that fiber is strong enough to potentially make cloth or to be woven with or something else. So, in short, let go of expectation as a beginner of what it is you're trying to produce, and just come back to the tangible parts. What does it feel like? How do you take care of your body in the process of learning to not be so stressed by expectation, so you can't get past like kind of physically holding. It's sort of like how knitters start out and all of their first sets of stitches are typically really tight. It comes from this expectation that I'm trying to make a thing, and I expect that thing to look like this image I have in my head. So yeah, letting go of the expectation of a specific kind of yarn and embracing the imperfection right from the start. Because I've learned for myself that the only way to get better at spinning is to spin. And the only way to get to the yarn that you do see in your head that you want to make is to keep learning and to keep practicing. Some people pick it up really quickly and some people don't, but everyone has that in between. Yes. So be a beginner. Just be what you are. Be a beginner, soak up information, be patient with yourself.
That's fantastic advice. Fantastic. Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially when you're older, you don't like not being good at something.
Yes.
100%.
And I am guilty of that as anybody.
I just don't have the knack. And I'm like, you've literally just touched it for an hour.
I know. If you could take your rational brain into it and be like, should you be good at this by now?
Like, it's not
a little kinder to yourself.
It's bestowed upon you. It's something that took us a long time to figure out,
Right. And I think we have this disadvantage. It's an advantage because of how it connects us, but it can be a disadvantage when you're learning to have access to so many people who already are doing the thing that you're doing. And if you go to find them from a learning perspective, it's great because you pick up things from them. You might even be inspired. But if you go to find them with a comparison lens, it can be very discouraging. And you see a video of someone who is just smoothly spinning away on their wheel or their spindle, and you don't know how long it took them to get there. You don't know their method of practice or any of that. What you see is the end.
Yes.
that comparison lens can be discouraging. And that's why I think if you just let go of an expectation, you be more open.
Definitely. I think that's so, so true. Fabulous. There's a good question there actually.
Oh, we have some questions in the chat.
Well, there is some questions actually. Mina, did you want to, were you compiling or?
Yeah, I can do all the questions if you want. There's actually quite a few. There's some really good ones. I saw some good ones come through.
Okay.
Fantastic. I was looking at them, I was like, oh, I can't wait.
Okay. Actually, before we get into the questions, and I kind of want this to go on the recording for anyone who watches this later, we had one attendee who was having trouble accessing the Zoom, getting onto the Zoom. I just so happened to check the Instagram account and saw the message on there. But in future, if you are having trouble accessing, please email on the spinandmake@gmail.com email address. Send us a copy of your confirmation that you purchased a ticket and tell us that you're having an issue. We can send you a direct link to join the Zoom. It's the quickest and easiest way to get hold of us, especially once the event has started. One of us will always be able to check the emails. Otherwise, don't count on us being able to check Instagram, because I just happened to look at it. And that's the only reason I managed to help this person. So just wanted to put that out there. Okay.
Yes.
Great.
First question was Maria the Enabler. What is your dream fiber to spin, and have you spun it yet?
My favorite fiber to spin?
Or what's your dream fiber to spin?
Oh, my dream. Thank you. My dream fiber to spin. I'm not sure if I've spun my dream fiber yet. I've spun some really good ones that felt almost intuitive, and a dreamy fiber for me is one that I think drafts pretty smoothly and shows itself almost as I sit down. So I kind of understand how to work it through my fingers. In that category, I would put Corriedale, Polworth, Shetland, probably those three to start. I do like combinations, so blends that include silk. And I recently, maybe this one would be a dream fiber for me to spin again. I recently spun a combination, a blend from my friend Anne, who is the owner of Middlebrook Fiberworks up in New Jersey. And it was a combination of Shetland from her own sheep, some other fine wools in a blend, and it had some Raimi, which is a plant fiber, and silk. I could have spun that for days nonstop. There was such a good combination of a little bit of grabby fiber, you know, small slubs of silk every now and then. The Raimi gave it a nice strength and a little sheen to it. It just had all the things that I really like about a fiber, but also I love the way the singles and the plied yarn came out. So that was pretty dreamy. But yeah, I tend to like, you know, long wools are lovely to spin because I feel like you can get a really good rhythm with them quickly. Yeah, I can't think of any that I haven't spun yet that I've been dreaming about. I feel lucky. I feel like I've spun some pretty dreamy ones already.
Awesome. Okay, so the next question is, what's the most precious / soulful fluff in your stash? So I guess that kind of comes on.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, let me think about that for 1 second.
I think we can add that to our questions for the interviews. Is a great question.
I think we need to.
I really like that one. I love that the person used soulful stash, because that to me is a connection to place and the shepherd or shepherdess. You know what? I have some Romney locks in my stash, and I was gifted this by a really good friend of mine, Jessica, when I went out to see her. She lives in the Pacific Northwest US, and it was a trip where I decided for my birthday I wanted to spend that time with her out on a completely different coast than mine. And I think the plane landed in Woollandia. In the span of 4 days, we went to a beautiful spinning centric yarn shop, which I'll link if I remember. And, you know, she had a fleece that she needed to process, this Romney fleece, and she knew the shepherd. She took me to a craft festival. It was like this whole maker weekend. And in this little bundle that I have now of Romney locks that we kind of huddled over and talked about are all the memories of that trip. And typical me, it's so precious that I haven't spun it yet.
I don't blame you. It's hard.
love it so much.
There's something really valuable in holding on as well, you know, and
I am going to spin from it. I will publicly commit that at some point I am going to spin from it, but that's a very soulful stash for me to know where it came from, to have been in that place, and that it's in its, you know, a pretty pure form. Having locks out of the fleece is pretty cool too. So it's going to take me some processing and prep and all of that.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we kind of answered this question, but the next question was, what do you think is most important to teach new spinners? I think you mentioned about the whole letting go of expectation.
Yes, patience and be resourceful. I remember being much younger and being so open to learning, and at that time it was from books. I was so open to learning from different sources because I knew myself well enough to know that I needed to dig for information until something clicked. And I think with spinning, you can come across 10 people who say, I have this kind of wheel and I spin this kind of yarn, and those two things might be the same across 10 people, and still the yarn they produce and the method they use and how they learned would be different. So I would say another thing I'd add maybe is just be resourceful and be willing to dig enough until something clicks for you, and maybe don't expect that there's only one way to do any part of this craft.
Yeah, I mean, along similar veins, it's like if I sit down to do some painting with my daughter, for example, she'll be like, Mummy, can you show me how to paint this? So I'll show her and she'll do it her way. And she'll be like, look, Mummy, I did it. Looks nothing like my painting. Obviously, she's 4, so I don't expect much from her. But she doesn't care that hers doesn't look anything like mine. She just cares that she's done it. And that's right. I think that's the thing. Is I always remember that. And I'm like, you know what, think more like a child, in that you're just happy doing the thing and you're happy learning. And that's the exciting part of it. It's not so much about getting it right the first time.
I totally agree. I love that comparison.
Another one, what is your go-to fiber?
Oh, my go-to fiber. Do I have a go-to fiber? Can I be honest? My go-to fiber right now is, it's this Lincoln Corriedale Romney mix that I got on a D-stash, and it's my go-to fiber because I have pounds of it. So what I decided is I would just keep splitting it up because I like to spin it. I have some of it here actually. I like spinning it. It's really lovely to dye. I do natural dyeing.
Yep.
And
is that the same one that you sent me?
Yes. Yep.
Because I got my one here too.
Yay. Yeah, I'm getting used to it. And I love how easy it is to sit down and kind of know this fiber. So yeah, that would be it. And I've spun Corriedale separately. I've spun Romney separately. I really enjoy those fibers anyway. So they'd probably fall into my go-to list, but I haven't had a huge stash of a specific breed. In fact, the only hand spun sweater spin that I've done was a combination of things, because not knowing how this spinning journey would turn out, I didn't buy, a whole fleece or pounds and pounds of a specific breed at one time, but I was offered some by another maker of this one. And I said, sure, I'll give that a try. And it's been nice because I've dyed it in the fiber. I've dyed it, I've spun the undyed fiber and dyed the yarn. It's been nice to keep going back to it.
Awesome. It's like a familiar thing. It's something you don't think about anymore because you just know what it's going to behave like.
Totally.
Okay.
I that, by the way, palette cleanser. If you struggle with a spinning project, go back to something
you're familiar with. All right. So next question. Have you thought about trying out any other fiber arts, like weaving, for example? Which is hilarious.
I did not like that.
I convinced you a while ago to give that a go.
That is a loaded question. I think I even said on our last monthly Zoom meeting that I was considering weaving. So have I considered it? Absolutely. A natural progression for me would be either making hand spun that's fine enough for me to do some embroidery, because I'm very interested in embroidery and I think I would love doing embroidery with my own hand spun. But weaving is a very natural progression, I think, from where I am, because I like to sew. And right now I don't do much garment sewing. I like sewing project bags. And the idea of weaving fabric and then sewing something like bags is very, very deliciously appealing to me. But since last month, the weaving adventure will probably put on hold because I really sat down and thought, am I ready to become a beginner again? Back to our previous conversation. Do I have the brain space and the real desire to become a beginner and go at weaving the way I went at knitting and spinning? And what I came to was that what I really want is my next spinning wheel. And so I've replaced new weaving hobby with next spinning wheel adventure, and just seeing what I can do with, you know, my Louette S10 is a great wheel, and it was great for me as a beginner, and it's really good at what it does, but I'm feeling like there may be other options. There's other formats in a wheel and other spinning ratios and other things that I would love to explore. So I've just replaced my weaving desire with spin on your next wheel and see what other yarns I can make.
Awesome. I think that's a really good idea.
I have to know what wheel you're looking at. I have to know. Tell me.
Shocked Matchless.
Yes!
Oh, yay!
Oh.
It feels weird to say that because it's like once you say it, it's like, oh, this Marce endorses the Matchless.
No idea,
I
really.
Spoke to people who know about these things.
I would love to get one. If I can get my hands on one, I'd love to. But
you know, they asked me like, what is it that you want to do? It's the wheel that Maria had that I tried when I was first even considering it. And you know, your friends will ask you like, okay, so you want a new wheel. What is it that you want from it? And when I explained those things, that's what came up.
Yeah. Fabulous.
So you'll forgive me not getting a loom by next meeting.
I'll just this once.
Okay, next question. We have lots of really good ones. Is there somewhere that you'd like to visit someday for a spinning related reason?
Oh my God.
A good question.
Anywhere that you all are.
The right answer. Sorry.
I mean, I'm very fortunate because I've been to some of the very fibery places that I always wanted to go to, you know, all over the UK. I've been to Edinburgh and I've been to parts of Ireland. I've been to Norway. I feel lucky. I feel like I've been to the places that felt to me like very fibery places. So I guess my real wish is to go back as soon as possible, as soon as it's safe, to some of those places. I live in South Florida. It's very warm here. I will say that I have a neighbor with 2 sheep, 2 Suffolk sheep down the road from me. I live in a rural area, but I love wool. I love places where wearing wool is appropriate. So yeah, I would 100% go across the pond again.
We'll have you back anytime once it's safe.
Thank you,
please come visit. Okay, next question. What is your most memorable project or piece of a project, like spinning a specific skein for one, and why?
My most memorable project is my handspun sweater. I'm not wearing it today. You all will forgive me. It's 80 degrees Fahrenheit here.
You're forgiven.
It's memorable for a lot of reasons. It's my biggest spin to date. It is an expression of something I once thought I was not going to be able to do with the amount of knowledge I had at the time. I thought to spin for a sweater seemed like this mythical, insurmountable thing. I imagined that I would have to have this pile of skeins of hand spun and they would all have to be perfectly plied and consistent throughout. And, you know, the things you tell yourself when you haven't tried something yet. And so it's an expression of overcoming all of that and working in a way that felt, in the end, very repeatable. And to be specific about that, the sweater is made up of some of Grace's hand-dyed fiber. It has some John Arbin fiber in there, and I'm a huge fan of John Arbin as a textile mill and with their products. And it has some commercial yarn in there. I mixed in some Brooklyn Tweed Loft. And I did it as, you know, almost like a random striping project with a design from a designer I love. And I say that it's repeatable because I focused on each part at a time. the first thing was, how do I combine all these fibers from different makers in different colors and make yarn that I want to knit with? And that was its own thing. And then once that was done, to spin it up and have the yarns themselves come out the way I wanted was its own thing. And then choosing a pattern was like, I want something that is going to fit my body well so that when this is done, I feel proud of the product. Found that. And then the knitting of it was joyful for me because I had not had that experience for that period of time before, to spend that much time with something that I made from scratch, if you will. And so that became its own thing. And then when you share that sort of thing with a community like this, it's like all the magical joy of appreciation washes over you and you're like, why haven't I done this before? So yeah, so taking it in chunks like that is very repeatable and was really memorable for me.
Awesome, that sounds great. Okay, moving on, talking about using your spindles. Someone's asked, do you use a top or bottom whirl spindle?
Top whirl. I have a couple of any spinners out there? Oh, bless you, my husband's sneezing back there. I have top whirl spindles for the most part. It's what I have taught on and what I use the most. I own bottom whirl spindles and supported spindles, a couple of each, but I just haven't practiced on them yet.
Fair enough. Next question. Oh, it's not really a question. Next comment was, I'm a total beginner, never thought of sampling. Great suggestion. And then I'm going to skip the next question because the one after is relevant to this comment. I'll come back to the other one. Someone's asked, how do you sample? I keep hearing about sampling, but find it quite daunting. How do you use your sampling? Is it just to try techniques, or if you use it to work a particular project, how do you keep track?
So I'll only speak for myself, but I would love for us to discuss this even more amongst the larger group. For me right now, sampling means it's my swatch for the yarn that I'm trying to create. And by that, I mean, when I start, I'm looking to make a small quantity of yarn. I'm probably talking 10 to 20 grams of the fiber that I'm about to spin. And I'm trying out things, treadle speed, drafting, how I want to draft that fiber. And because it's a small amount, I'm okay with the first few grams just being all over the place and eventually finding a rhythm with that fiber. So I'm sampling my own technique and I'm sampling the properties of that fiber. I try my best to pay attention to what does this fiber naturally want to do, you know, according to the staple or how it was prepared. And then most likely I'm going to ply at least a 2-ply from that small amount, and then to see what kind of twists do I put into the plies versus what I did in the singles. And so I'm taking that final length of 10 grams of yarn and I'm looking at it, you know, oh, it was much easier when I was treadling this way and had this much twist in. Once I plied it, this section was really overspun, this was underspun. So I'm looking, you know, kind of granularly at the strands of yarn themselves, but I'm also as much sampling, do I want to work with 100, 200, 300 grams of this? Did I enjoy this experience? And then I'm also doing things like finishing it. So I will soak it. I will try things like, you know, do I need to thwack this or weight it because I overspun it? So all that finishing process, I'm sampling that as well. And I'm just now learning about things like twist angle and spinning ratios. So for me, it's more of a study approach. So I mean by that, instead of saying, I want to get this twist angle out of this, and I'm going to try to do that in the sample, I just do what feels natural. And then I go back to the kind of measurements that you can do and say, oh, that's how that came out, and try to tie that together with my method. I hope that makes sense.
Like doing a gauge swatch for a knitting pattern. You just do
exactly how I treat it. Yeah.
You finish it and you do everything that you would with your finished project, and then you read your gauge and you figure out, do I need to adjust anything?
Yes, and I make notes as much as I can. I will take like a little index card or something and put a strand of that around it, the single, and put a strand of the 2-ply, for example, around it. And I'll make little notes, even about, you know, I was a bit stressed when I maybe ease up a little bit when you go back to do this again. And what I found so far, and again, I've just started doing this, what I found so far is that by the time I've done that 10 to 20 grams, what I know from the sample is I'm going to do the rest of the yarn like this, or I'm not going to do the rest of the yarn like this. Here are the things that I am going to try to shift to, you know, correct or do differently. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I will be honest, like Grace, I don't sample, but I'm more of a fly by the seat of my pants type of spinner kind of thing.
Hello, yeah.
But
and I was too. To be honest, I was too from the beginning, because for me it was so much about, let's try this fiber. What is this fiber like, and how does this?
Still in that phase.
Yeah. So I mean, there was a lot of that.
I think for me, the lack of desire for wanting to start some, I understand the process, I understand why you would do it. I watched all of Rachel's videos, so she goes on and on about sampling, which is really good information, and I've loved absorbing all of that information. So I understand all the reasons why people do it. I have no desire to, mainly because there again, knitting and designing is my job, and I have to do all of that from my job. So my spinning is like my let go and can do whatever the hell I want, and I don't have to worry about writing up a pattern for somebody. So I don't worry about it. And so for me, I'm just like, you know what, I will create yarn and I will be able to make something from it. So I don't really mind how it turns out. So that's kind of my mentality coming at it, which is really interesting whenever I listen to someone who does the whole sampling thing and is very specific about how they do it. It's just always interesting to hear different people's perspectives on things and reflect on why I don't feel that way necessarily sometimes. Especially with people like you, people are my friends, people I know, people I respect. And it's like, okay, well, I understand what they say and it makes sense, but why don't I want to do it? And then it's an opportunity to like reflect on your own position and how you feel about things as well. So yeah, awesome.
I think that's a great way to take on any information that you get, is to reflect it back to yourself and see if it fits. It didn't always fit for me, and I know after making the sweater that was a turning point, because what really happened is I started thinking about my spinning as a larger quantity exercise. So I was perfectly happy spinning a lot of single skeins in the beginning. That was a great way to try out fibers. And then when I made a whole project out of something and I enjoyed it, sorry, I enjoyed it so much, I thought, if I were to do this again with all one breed, you know, all one type of yarn, I would want it to be somewhat consistent throughout. And so to achieve that, I'm gonna, just like knitting swatches, crochet swatches, I'm gonna have to do some math. And it wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be.
No, I think okay. And I'm pretty sure at some point down the line, I will want to do it as well. But I just know right now, that's not where my head's at.
Yeah, and you have to move through those stages at a pace that is sustainable.
Yeah, perfect. All right, next question, a slight detour. What are your favorite materials to use for natural dyeing?
Oh, that's an easy one. I could talk about this all day. My favorite materials for natural dyeing are onion skins, avocado pits and peels. Those are top two. I really
have an avocado
as well.
In your back garden.
I didn't hear that. I'm sorry, Grace.
I'm sorry. I was wondering, I can't remember. Did you have an avocado tree around, like in your back garden or something?
We have a Florida green avocado tree. I did not do well last year, but we have lots of baby avocado trees now coming up from it.
Oh.
Yeah, I love, so onion skins give you yellow, orangey yellows, almost into a red tone if you use yellow and red onion skins. Avocados can give you anywhere from a pale blush pink out to, you know, a near wine color. And marigolds, which I just grew last year for the first time in my garden, grew really well, produce a lot of color for not very many flower heads. And with those, once you add things like a few modifiers like iron, you can get yellows and greens. But I love food waste for natural dyeing because it feels like I am getting the absolute most out of an item. I'm allergic to avocados. I can't eat them very much, but my husband eats several a week. And you can tell he lives with a dyer because all onion skins and avocado pits get left on the counter for me to clean up and put away. It's, you know, he gets the enjoyment or I get the enjoyment of eating the thing. Then I use the item to dye either fabric or fiber or yarn. And then I put the waste out into the garden where from now on, I plan to be growing some kind of other dye plants anyway. So it's this whole full cycle thing. And I also love them because they're accessible. Like most people can get those things. And with them, you literally can put onion skins into a pot of hot water and get color and put yarn in it and be happy. You don't need mordants, you don't need modifiers, you don't need a lot of skill. You can boil them at high temperatures with onion skins. And I love that. I love that it's easy. Avocados are a little bit more tender, if you will, when it comes to heat and things like that. The process takes a little bit longer, but still it's food waste. The worst scenario is you don't get the color you intended and you put them out in the yard, compost them.
There you go, perfect.
See, I could talk about it all day, I told you.
couple more questions. One is, are you tempted by an e-spinner? I backed the electric e-wheel spinner and I'm excited for it to arrive in April.
Well, congrats on that, because I know that's going to
be, by the way.
I know many electric wheel spinners who love it, especially as an option. I can see the appeal of something that's small, fast, portable, one less body part to coordinate because you don't necessarily need to treadle. I am not tempted by an e-spinner, not at all. And I know why that is. It's because this part of fiber crafts for me is very tactile. So the fact that I have to coordinate my feet to treadle with my hands doing a movement, and the fiber is moving through my hands at a pace that I create is actually what I love about it. And I'm not yet at the point where I necessarily need something that's always going kind of at the same speed to create the same kind of yarn. I don't need that for myself. I totally understand the appeal of it. But yeah, that's why I haven't been tempted yet. It's also the reason why I have a wheel, but I still spin on my drop spindle quite often. There's something a little bit more, rich for me the closer I am to the process, if that makes sense.
That does make sense.
Yeah.
Okay. A few more questions. Sure. The chat exploded as soon as you mentioned the shacked matchless. The chat exploded. So I'm trying to find the question amongst all the conversation about wheels.
I'm getting like thumbs up, like this is a good idea.
So another question: is there one spinning project you would like to make this year that you are really looking forward to?
Yes, I am actually going to spin for another sweater. And this time what I'd like to do is spin all in one color, an undyed fiber. And my goal would be to design the sweater itself, knit to fit my body, spin the yarn, and make that sweater. That's my plan.
Awesome. That sounds like a really good idea.
I'm working on a prototype now in a commercial yarn just to get all the numbers in my head, and then I'll have the fun of creating a yarn to come close to a gauge that I want.
Awesome. Okay.
Great questions. Thank you guys.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one. So a question that was asked to Grace last time and resulted in me obsessively listening to the Creep Dive. Do you listen to any podcasts or audiobooks while spinning and crafting?
1000%. Although I do enjoy every now and then working with yarn and fiber in silence, it's not something I crave all the time. I actually like the multitasking effect of listening to audiobooks, which I love, and podcasts. I guess I'll talk about what I'm doing right now. I found this wonderful rabbit hole of watching multiple seasons of a show called The Wire. Some of you might know.
Oh, yes.
It's an HBO show, which I have seen before, and didn't realize that I had missed like 3 whole seasons. So I'm watching The Wire on HBO, and sometimes I'm watching that while I spin. But then I also found a podcast called Unspoiled. And it's this format of podcast where they basically discuss episode by episode the host's feelings about what happened in that episode. And going from watching an episode and spinning, and then maybe listening to watching the show while doing a fiber craft, and then listening to the podcast while doing another fiber craft, and feeling like, oh my gosh, I didn't notice that in the show, or I hadn't really thought about that character's reaction in that way, has been the best. It's like, when you find that thing and like, I'm going to be able to sink into this for hours. It's really nice.
Awesome.
Especially when it seems like you've watched everything on the planet, right?
Oh, yeah.
You've had a year of lockdown.
Yeah,
Ugh.
rewatching something is what's bringing me the joy, which is surprising.
Okay, so the last few questions / comments are relating back to the natural dyeing, so you're going to love this, Marce. First one is, do avocado trees / leaves / bark dye material work as dye materials as well?
Leaves I have tried, bark I have not tried. I don't have access to bark that I'd be comfortable using, like I wouldn't take bark off of our live trees. The leaves I have tried, and like many leaves in the plant kingdom, they give you a nice pale beige tan color.
Okay.
Attractive and rare.
Yeah, I mean, which is fine. They make a great neutral if that's what you're looking for. Not super exciting.
Someone was asking, it was saying no mordant. I can't remember what that was referring back to.
Oh, that was for the onions. She was talking about the onions.
Yeah.
You actually don't need a mordant for avocado dyeing, avocado skin and pit dyeing either.
Okay.
It helps, right? For those of you who understand the concept of mordants, it's essentially something that you can add to the dye material to help it affix to the thing you're trying to dye. And it can also help with things like keeping color longer, so making it color fast, and making it light fast so that it doesn't fade with exposure to sunlight. And natural dyes in general are susceptible to both of those things, not being color fast or light fast. So a mordant can kind of help with that. So in most cases, it does not hurt to add a mordant. In fact, in some cases, it can give you like more depth of color. For some of those food dyes, you don't need it for the color to stay.
Okay. So then Bex was saying, find a friend who works in a restaurant and you'll be set for life, which is true.
If farmers markets are a thing again, go there, find their onion basket and just say, do you mind if I just shovel these onion skins into my paper bag? Thank you very much. I've done.
And then I think this is the last question, or was the last one at the moment, is how do you keep the avocado from turning brown?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking that. So my particular method for storing up a good amount of avocado skins and pits is that as soon as my husband's done eating them, he leaves them out for me so that I can use just a regular dish brush, even the back of a dish sponge, to wipe out any fleshy bits that are left on the skin and any fleshy bits that are left around the seed. I clean all of that off and I put them in my pantry and let them dry. You can also take them, I still would recommend cleaning them up, take them and freeze them, stick them in a bag in your freezer, and you can keep them for as long as you want. And when you're ready to dye, you take them straight out of the freezer and put them into the dye pot. Onion skins are easy. I keep a paper bag nearby in the pantry and I just, every time we use an onion, I put the skins in there.
Okay, awesome. All right, I think that's the end of the questions, unless any more crop up.
I've just noticed one thing. Sorry, Rena. Tamara was saying, it was just more of a comment, but I think it's something important to mention. She said, sampling scares me because I get this fear that I'd wind up using all the fiber trying to get a sample I like. Irrational, but very daunting. And then she goes on to say, when I started spinning, I was lower budget and I could only get 4, maybe 8 ounces of anything. So, you know, there is that little bit of caution, I suppose, with people when they're starting out, or especially if you've not got, you know, the cash to be blowing on an extra 20 grams, like sometimes. So that's an I just wanted to mention that, I guess.
It's completely valid. And I think things like that give us the opportunity to think about what is the goal. If my goal is from a value perspective to use most of this fiber, it's what I can afford, and there's a project that I have in mind and it'll make me a hat, sampling may not be necessary for you to get to know that fiber, especially if you're fine with the way the yarn comes out. You may end up with things like, you know, I've got more thick and thin bits than I wanted, or maybe it was overspun and so the fabric bias is a little bit. But if you've already decided that for the experience of having used that fiber, you're fine with that, then I would say sampling isn't a requirement for any of us. It's not mandatory. I think sampling comes into play especially when you're trying to make a yarn that's a bit more predictable when it's going to be used.
I think of it. Sampling is quite useful for when you end up with lots of fleeces for free being dumped on your doorstep, which happens.
And the
If you
community
start
is
going
great.
around
So
to
if
show
there's something, yeah, like if there's something you're thinking about doing and you're thinking, well, I don't want to buy X amount of this, the likelihood that is, if you feel comfortable, you could even say into the community, like, I'm looking for, 50 grams of this type of yarn. I just need enough to sample before I make a purchase decision. I'm frugal by nature, and I think cost is something we should all be cognizant of, right? But you may be able to get your sample amount from another source that maybe doesn't feel like I have to either invest in the whole thing at once or I'm committed to this now. If you get it from someone else in the community, you may feel comfortable just using that for sampling. That's its only purpose at the time.
So Rachel has jumped in and added, often the 2, 4, or 6 ounce braid is the sample itself.
It can be.
I mean, because you get a thing at the end. That's you do get hand spun at the end, and I think that's
Basically a thing.
That's all my first skeins, by the way. Just lovely samples.
Yeah, lovely, beautiful samples.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we're at the end of the Q&A.
Okay, awesome.
Wrap up
Well,
the
I appreciate you all so much. Thank you so much. And for everyone who's watching this on YouTube and the replay, thank you for coming to find Fluff to Stuff on YouTube. And yeah, keep following along with this year-long adventure.